Well, hello my friends. Welcome to another afternoon with Carpo. I've got my cock, my coffee, my vape, and I'm going to try to settle in here and make a quick video that probably won't be so quick, which is why I'll probably have to settle in. To get straight to the point, I actually have two subjects that I wanted to discuss today, and they're both related to one another. But I think I'll have to make probably just a note about this secondary issue at the end. But they're both related. And they both have to do with protesting. They both have to do with our right to protest corruption, to protest our government when we see things are not suitable for us. And I'm going to have to adjust this camera a little bit, because it's going to bug me if I'm not centered. Because I have that weird symmetry thing going on. I'll get to that another time. I'd like to talk about the DAPL, the Dakota Pipeline. And this is an issue that I've been privy to but not wanted to mention, only because there's only so much that I can say about this particular subject. But I kind of wanted to see where it was going to go until this point. And I've mentioned it previously in a couple of videos, but what's making me speak about it right now in particular is the media blackout on the issue. Now, I'm not going to go as far as to say that no media is covering it. I specifically searched out to see if CNN, CBS, all these mainstream places were talking about it, Fox News, all of them. And they all have articles about it. They're all talking about it. But as to how much is actually on the mainstream newscasts, I have no idea because I don't watch it. And I haven't watched or read mainstream news in a really long time. But I'll just say it's important to know what's going on in a situation before we start sending out tweets and Facebook posts about, how we feel on a particular subject. This particular subject is a very difficult one for some people to... Wow, weird. Strange light. I just replaced this light bulb and the last one exploded just a little while ago. So hopefully it won't explode in my face. What's going on with the Dakota Pipeline is that the tribes in the area are protesting the pipeline because they don't want it to go through their sacred lands. Now, there are many different reasons why. They've spoken of burial mounds. They've gone and scouted out the route of the pipeline to see if there are any graveyards or important sacred sites within it. And, of course, there are, and there could be arguments to whether a person says, well, there are too many sacred sites, but it's in the sense that people seem to think that the natives make everything sacred, and that, that's impeding business as usual. Now, on this issue, I'm not going to... It's quite obvious. I don't need to say who I side with. I side with the idea of stopping the pipeline, but it doesn't mean that I side completely with the protesters in every situation. Now, there were reports the other day of a protester firing off a few shots. Nobody got shot, but she was apparently arrested on suspicion, and this is supposedly she was shooting at police. Now, there is some deep shit going on. Now, the DAPL, not only are they the local police, but then we also have the DAPL security, which are the henchmen for the oil company. These people come in and they pose as protesters and cause problems. One of them was caught, I think it was yesterday, and he was driving down the road towards the camp, and they somehow blocked the road and got him to drive off the road, get out of his car. And he had an AR-15 assault rifle and a bandana over his nose and his mouth. And he was pointing it at the natives that were coming towards him, and they were trying to talk him down. They weren't backing down. They ended up backing him into a small pond or a swamp or whatever it was. And he was, he backed into it a ways. They talked about it. They ended up disarming him and arresting him with tribal police. Meanwhile, they were searching his car. Inside his car, they found registration and a badge that was DAPL security badge, and as well the car was registered to the oil company. It's not a conspiracy that they send people in to try to make everyone look bad. But, you know, they're just itching for somebody to start shooting or causing problems so they can make the protesters look bad. But look, I don't want to get too into the details. What I really want to say here is that whatever you feel, however you feel about the pipeline or protesters, if you're on the side of the protesters, well, then you have your view. If you're on the side of the pipeline, then you have your view as well. However, what I would like to say is that if you're opposed to the protesters and you think that protesting this is something to scoff at or that these people are just getting in the way, I'd like you to consider that this is happening in your backyard too, especially if you live here in the U.S. This is your backyard. If you went in one morning and turned on your tap water and you were able to light your tap water on fire, which is what happens from fracking, you would be opposed to fracking very quickly. Yet people allow fracking and try to support it in many areas by talking about the amount of jobs it brings. But no amount of jobs are worth our health. Now, the landowners on some of these wells that are being pumped, oil, natural gas, and whatnot, are supposed to get, I believe, a 12.5% of the profits as a kickback, and every month they get a check, residual checks, and these are royalty checks that they're supposed to get. And according to many of them, they cut them down to like a quarter of what they used to get and say, well, it's for exploration or whatever it might be. It's like the little service fee on your cable bill. What do? Once these barons come in and they take over your land, there's not a lot you can do. Now look, it's not just the Native American tribes that are opposing this. There are also several farmers in Iowa. And earlier I was looking on YouTube and I looked for recent videos relating to the pipeline, and I found one from today. It was from this farmer from Iowa who was talking about how, you know, these experience he had with these protesters that were in his lawn or in his yard, and he tried to base the entirety of the protesters and what they're doing on what he heard just from a couple of them. And just one second. So a lot of these people that are protesting the actual pipeline are not just Native Americans. They are also farmers and ranchers who have had to forcibly give up their land through eminent domain. Eminent domain is when a federal ruling basically says that if something's hindering progress, then too bad, you're going to lose out. And people are forced out of their homes all the time for this. It's a very distracting, I should say, well, distracting is the perfect word, because that's how I feel right now, because I'm being distracted because my kids came in there, and that's why I had to leave there for a minute. But, so hold on, I'm going to actually... Hey, what can I say? I've got a life. I've got a family. I got shit to do too. It's hard to find time to make a video when I have this buffer room between me and the house, but now I'm letting them hang out and play on the TV and stuff and do what kids do, which is just what it's all about. Family. We're all families, and we have people that we care about and people that we love, and we want to make sure that they're protected and that they have a future. You know, that the future isn't destroyed by short-term gain for a few. In the case of these pipelines, you know, it's funny because these protesters are made to look like losers by some people, as if, you know, don't you have something better to do? And there have been a lot of insults cast about people who are coming from all around the world and other states. And I've heard so many people say, well, God, most of these protesters are white. Doesn't that tell you something? It's because people are coming around and they're supporting their fellow man in a time of crisis, because we know how important this is. There's an argument that this pipeline is safer because of the oil tankers that can crash and the idea that trains can be derailed, and there are many issues that could point to safety concerns. But pipelines are not safer, because when they go big. Coincidentally, today there was a huge pipeline explosion in Alabama. And you might remember that leak recently, which I believe was 600,000 gallons, or was it 600 million gallons? I guess it really doesn't matter, because trying to put that in perspective is not easy. It's a lot. And they leaked so much gasoline out of this pipeline that it raised the prices last month or a couple months ago. And now this explosion today, or last night, may cause the same kind of problems. But the idea is that the oil trade is fragile. And I understand that people who live here, who support the pipeline and support oil, they do so because they think that it's prosperous, that it's helping our country. They're told that it brings us jobs, which it does. And they're told that it brings our economy up, which it can. But the problem is that these oil companies are not national oil companies. Many countries nationalize their oil, and it doesn't mean that the money all goes to the right people. But there have been many nations who have tried to nationalize their oil. In fact, recently Syria tried to nationalize their oil. Gaddafi wanted to nationalize his oil. The U.S. was quick to stop that. And there's a lot to be said about world oil issues, but the DAPL, this Dakota pipeline, it is starting in Canada, and it goes, I believe, 1,200 miles down to the Gulf Coast. Now, pipelines like this leak all the time, and it crosses several waterways. If I'm not mistaken, it crosses the Missouri 4 or 5 times. That's quite a bit, and it's nothing to just scoff at, you know. These are tar sands up in Canada. Now, for those who don't know, tar sands, it's not like the old days of pumping oil. These sands have to be extracted out down to get the crude oil, and it takes 1 gallon of crude to make 2 gallons of crude when you are extracting tar sands. So it's a labor-intensive and energy-intensive process. But they want to be able to pipe it quickly down there. You think about this. This is going straight from Canada, okay? All the way down to the coast, so it can be pumped and shipped off. If this is coming from Canada, then you can only imagine that many of the profits are going to Canada. So I'm wondering when the U.S. people get, how this is worth it for the U.S. people to have this happening, and how we can marginalize people who are protesting for clean water and their rights, while we cherish and uphold people who are protesting in a completely disgusting manner, such as what happened with the Bundys. And I was going to make that a separate video, but I wanted to mention that the Bundys, who, I grew up in Oregon, and I love the Malheur area. I love down in southern Oregon. And so when I found out that a bunch of militia members had taken over the Malheur, wildlife refuge headquarters, I said, well, what do they want? Now, this was last year. And we had several armed men, and recently the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife released the photos from the occupation of this building, which was for a long time. I believe it was a few months at least. And they trashed the place. They left it looking horribly, and apparently the entirety of all this, with the displaced workers that weren't able to go to work at the refuge, and all the people that had to be moved around and displaced until they get the place fixed up and working again, it's cost them between, 6 million plus another 3 million for the workers, and then the work that's going to have to be done to fix this place. So in come a whole bunch of armed militia members with guns and this idea that they're going to take over federal lands. And then they occupy it with no real resistance from the federal government or anyone else. And when they pack up and leave, and then they finally go to trial over this, They were just acquitted. 6 of them were acquitted the other day. Now, what bothers me about this is that it was handled completely opposite of the way it would have been done if a bunch of Black Panthers had stormed and taken over a wildlife refuge, or Mexicans for that matter, or, dare I say, Arabs, because if even 2 Arabs took it over, that place would be nuked in no time, metaphorically. We don't mess around unless they are white guys. Here's the thing about the Bundys. They weren't even from here, okay? I grew up in this area. They were from Texas, and they were upset about their land use rights. And when they were asked what they wanted, finally, and this is what really bugged me, because here's a militia who's claiming that they want freedom for the people. But when they were asked what they wanted, they finally came to 2 different things. They said, 1, they want federal land returned back to the people, so the resources belong to the people. Which basically means they want federal protection removed from the lands that we've worked so hard to protect, so huge companies can come in and just mine and wipe it out, which is exactly what they'd do if the regulations were gone. In other words, if that protection was taken away, the Bundys would get rolled over by huge corporations, just like everyone else. Okay, that's a ridiculous desire. If you want to alter the way things are used and change it, that's one thing. But they were upset, not for the other people, but for their personal losses, because they had cattle grazing on public lands, and they got fined and had issues because they hadn't been properly following the rules, and they claimed the federal government had no jurisdiction. So in many ways I do agree with some of the things that they're saying, the homesteading laws and whatnot, but it's very complex in this new world. They were not only acquitted on these charges, but, you know, what really bugged me the most was the idea that the second thing that they wanted was their friends released from jail or their charges lessened. And their friends, I think it was the Hammonds, these people had been accused, and this was even on trial by one of their own family members. They'd been accused of poaching an entire herd of wild deer, and then when they were caught or seen doing it, he gave out matches, boxes of matches to all his friends, and they supposedly said, "Hey, let's burn down the country." Of course, they didn't mean the country, but they wanted to hide all the evidence. When he was confronted on it, it ended up losing control and burning, I don't know, thousands of acres or something like that. When he was confronted on it, he said that he was just trying to clear some brush from the land. But the federal government already knew and had evidence that he had been poaching. So he got the mandatory minimum, which was 5 years. Both of them did. And then a judge thought it was a harsh sentence. So he actually reduced the sentences. One guy got 2 years and one guy got 3 months. Now, once they got out and served their sentence, another federal judge said no. He refused to go with that and said you have to follow the federal law. So they were forced to return to prison to finish their sentences. I can understand how this could upset the Bundys. I really can. However, it doesn't mean that yes, the justice system is screwed, but that's not a reason that you destroy the rights of the people. Here's the thing. The people that they were saying they wanted released from jail, both of them said that they did not support the actions that Bundy was taking and that they wanted nothing to do with him and they didn't want him to represent them at all. So neither of the things that they were hoping to actually conclude were even feasible. But more than that, it was a waste of militia effort. It just showed the federal government what they need to do next time to back people down and to shut them up. It made it a lot easier to see how far people would take it and what might happen, and without having to give anything up. If they actually had a list of demands, that might be one thing. Which brings me back to Standing Rock. What are their list of demands? Well, all they originally wanted was an assessment, an environmental impact assessment on the area. And this is how they delayed it, I believe, from back in July, or August is when I think they got an injunction. Now, there have been several things proposed. I mean, Obama proposed a $10 per barrel tax on the pipeline, oil. I don't know if that's a good or a bad idea, nor do I know where that money's going to go. I don't know what's the right plan of action here. These people have invested billions of dollars, okay? tens of billions of dollars. They're not going to just shut down shop because people are in their way. One thing that is really upsetting is that the protesters have had dogs sicked on them from the security forces. 12 people have been bitten by dogs. Now, that is something that I just can't accept. You know, if humans want to confront one another, that's one thing. What really happened is everything kind of came to a head a couple days ago. The police moved into the main camp and arrested 141 people and raided the camp, confiscated everything. There were burned vehicles in the roadways. It's chaos over there. But the media isn't talking about it. Now, here's the thing. If there was a protest going on in Philadelphia over a black kid who got shot, or anywhere else for that matter, like there have been so many times, the media will cover it incessantly. They will be right on top of it. But when it comes to something like this, that's further out there, it's not as important to them. But there's more than that. And I don't want to believe that the oil barons have any influence on the media, but we know that they do, just like everyone else. It's not always about a giant conspiracy. Often it's about who can drop the biggest load of cash on somebody to say shut up. It could be a network producer. It could be somebody who you just want to speak out for you. Or like the generic farmer in a commercial who's talking about how he feels about the pipeline and he thinks it's so great. And I know there's still some animosity between Native Americans and me, my people, if you want to call it that, as Native Americans. We're all Native Americans, is my point. I don't think that just because a person who is, has Native American blood, that they're any more Native than I am. We all need to get past that. In other words, what my ancestors did was horrible. And even if I had lived at that time, hopefully I would have had the sense to know that that was wrong. And I want you to know, all the Native Americans out there, that there are lots of people who weren't like that. A lot of people who befriended the natives and tried to help them and assist them because they understood and cared. Just like there were people who were opposed to slavery. There are always good people, and then there are people who are just amoral or don't have the value of human life like everyone else. So I think that the protesters have every right to do what they're doing, and I really hope that they're able to impact their local laws and change it. At least get the pipeline possibly situated in a way where it's more conducive and less environmental damage. I don't think they're going to stop it, but if they do, it would be a wonderful vindication for all of us. They also need warm clothing. I just want to put that as a last note. They need long johns, coats, gloves, things like that, and I'll try to put the link in the description as to where to send that stuff once I get a chance to post it up. And I didn't want to forget to mention that. So, we have to support each other. Just because a protest doesn't concern you at the moment doesn't mean that it won't down the road. And there's a lot of things going on in our backyard that we need to deal with as best we can and learn the issues. Not just be opposed to it because of what it is, but try to figure out the best way to do it if it's going to happen anyway. So, I just don't know. Running out of time, so I'll talk to y'all later. Have a wonderful day.